behind the scenes, it was a small group of people that were doing everything.
Welcome back to the GTM podcast. It's your host, Scott Barker.
I want to know how this insane growth actually happened.
Welcome back to the GTM pods. As always, it's your host, Scott Barker. Thank you for hanging out with us for the next 45 minutes or so. As always, we bring on real operators who are still in the trenches, building, scaling businesses, and we try and just break down what really happens behind closed doors. There's a lot of glorified content out there where we get to see, things after the fact, the nice rosy version of how companies are built, but it's oftentimes a lot more messy. And we try and highlight that on this podcast. And super excited for this guest. I will give this guest the award for the most elusive podcast guest that we've had on to date, which is totally fair. Because he's actually busy doing the thing that he does, which is building companies. But I am joined by Scott Gifis. Scott, welcome, man.
Thanks, Scott. Appreciate it. And yeah, sorry for being elusive. I think it's like two parts of like being really busy and also wondering why people want to listen to me talk about anything. But excited to get into it. Lots of fun stuff to talk about.
It's funny to me hearing you say that. And obviously, you're an incredibly humble guy, and we did a little pre-meeting before this, and I was like, man, like, look at what you've done. We could talk about anything and people will want to pick that brain of yours. So for the listeners, and you'll know why I say that shortly. So Scott is currently the CEO of NoFraud. He's also a limited partner in various funds, including GTM Fund. Thank you so much for the support, man. And previous to that was the president and COO at Frame.io, which was bought by Adobe. You were there through that, acquisition. And then before that was the president of AdRoll. You were there for 6 years. So those are some pretty behemoth roles, man. And I'm excited to walk through it. But is there anything else people should know about Scott Gifis that I missed there?
No, I mean, it always sounds impressive when you say those things. And I've been really impressed with all the guests you've had on the show, and so excited and humbled to be here. I think other stuff to know. I've got 3 fierce daughters, ranging from 20 to 11, and so very proud of them, and sort of personal responsibility to do my best in my little parts of the world to try to level the playing field that they're entering for the future in a very crazy world right now. But no, other than that, geek out about all this stuff. So excited to get into it with you.
Question, because I feel like I talk to a lot of, ultra high performers, super lucky to have them on the podcast and be, friends with a lot of them. And it's almost like two camps. And one is like, they have kids and they're so stressed out. It's absolutely insane of like balancing their work life with, being a good dad or a good mom. It seems like, at least from the outside, you seem to have like always this like calm demeanor. You got things, locked in. How has it been for you balancing raising your 3 daughters? And during that whole time period, you can just like do the math. You had these insane roles with an insane amount of responsibility. How have you managed to balance both without losing your mind?
Yeah, not well. Not well at all, I'd say. You'd have to ask them. I always say I'm like a very below average husband. I would say like an average. I try to be like an above average, like an average father. No, I mean, you have to have. Folks have talked about this forever. I remember I saw Jack Welch on stage talking about this one time, and there's really no such thing as balance. It's just choices. And my our CEO at NextRoll, which is a company that owned AdRoll, Toby Gabriner, who's now running Bitly, another great New York-based SaaS company out there. He used to call it harmony, and I think you just have to sort of give yourself the freedom to lean into the areas that need you. I mean, it's frankly, it's like anything else in life. It's like running a company. I mean, you're rarely what I tell, and even for my friends, I say to folks all the time, I'm not like a great like sunny weather friend, and I'm not like a great sunny weather like person. Like, I'm built to handle problems, I think. And so, but if shit's going down, like I'm there. I got you. I'm in it with you as a friend, as a family member. I think with the girls, you just try to make the most of the times that you have. So you get really intentional about, like, I try to be very present. I think if you ask folks, even at work or whatever, I try not to be distracted when I'm in the moment. So if I'm with you, like we're talking here, I'm not really worried about all the shit that's going on at work or all the things going on in the world. Like, we're here together, we're going to hang out, we're going to spend time, and then afterwards we'll kind of move on. And I try to make sure I do similar things with the family. It's COVID was awful. Obviously, the pandemic was terrible. We lost a lot of people during that time. But on the glass half full sort of side of the house, it was an opportunity for me to really spend more time with my family and that kind of thing. So I try to do a little bit better job balancing it. And then you have to make sure you're also prioritizing time. Like, the hardest thing being from home is that there is no commute for you to decompress when you leave work. So you have to make sure you're budgeting in sort of buffers in your life so that you're able to transition and stay present. So I don't know. I would say, like, not well. I know people that do it much better than I do, but do try to make the most of the time that I have when I'm with my family, same as when I'm with peers or work or whatever it is.
No, I like that. I feel like, 30 minutes when you can feel someone who's fully present and you have their undivided attention is worth so much more than like 3 hours, of someone like being distracted or half in it. I also resonate with the decompression time. I have, my friends and family, usually if I go straight from work to like a function, I'll just say like, hey, I'm still in work mode. Like I haven't, they'll be like, what's wrong? Nothing is wrong. I'm just still in work mode. Just give me a sec.
For a long time, I didn't even talk to home while I was at work, because even like my voice would be different. It's sort of like the girls would be like, are you mad? I'm like, no, I'm not mad. It's just, this is just like work mode that I'm in, like you said. And, so you have to do that. So, again, been very fortunate in life. I have a gym in my house. So like, after work, I'll go work out. Like that's part of my regimen. And then that gives me, even if it's a 30-minute run or something, it just gives me time to kind of transition into being home. So I'm not bringing my work with me, even if it's just, sitting out for dinner as a family. So, but I don't know. There's a lot of smart people out there that talk about those things on a regular basis. They seem to have it put together better than I do.
They talk about it well. Anyway, maybe you'd audit some of their houses and maybe wouldn't be living it quite the same. But I love it. Well, man, I think, having known you for, a few years now and talked to you about a bunch of different things, one of the things I think you've done really well consistently is just like build great teams and surround yourself by great, leaders and, set them up for success. So I want to kind of make that sort of the theme of this conversation today. But before we get there, because this is more just, man, I host this podcast. Sometimes I just get to ask questions that I'm just like curious about. Is I don't know a bunch about your time before AdRoll. How did you, I guess, like early on in your career, was there any impactful moments that were like, man, I could run large scale companies. I have leadership abilities. Like there's something that must have happened before you get some of these, bigger sort of life changing opportunities that allowed you to have the confidence to be able to take those roles. And then, because you're obviously continuously learning even once you're in those roles. But yeah, I'm curious about that time period before.
It's funny. I was talking to a friend a while back, and they were looking at making a career change, and they were looking at roles, and they're just like, I don't think I'm qualified. And they're like, how do you know when you're qualified? I was like, I don't think I've ever taken a job I was qualified for in my life. I think I just like always took a job that I was, over my skis. I mean, so I wanted to be a pro hockey player, and I made a concession with my dad, who he's like, look, if you're not going to go to college, like you got to go and get practical experience that you can fall back on. In the off chance that a kid from Jersey doesn't make it to the show, right? Which is, I think there's been 2 New Jersey players, maybe 3 to make it to the NHL. And so I said, yeah, it's a good idea. And this goes back before there was Google, just to really properly date myself. And so I took jobs. I got experience working for like a really small family office, doing grunt work and research and things like that. And which back then meant going to a library or calling people out of a phone book. I mean, it was like just to really put things in perspective. And and I sort of fell in love. Like, they invest in a lot of early stage companies, founders, and I just fell in love with that entire dynamic of somebody being a deep expert in a certain area, having passion for something, wanting to build it, and then quickly running into these roadblocks as they went around. Well, shit, how do I take this idea and turn it into a product, turn this product into a company, turn this company into like a real organization, right? A real business. And so I got into it, and I had some really unique experiences early in my career. And I've been in a ton of different industries, from solar energy through, HR, professional services, IT, et cetera. I mean, it's just kind of run the gamut, leading up to AdRoll. And, I don't know. The sort of joke I always say to folks is I really only have a couple of skills. They just so happen to connect to running like a technology company. Like if I was sent back in time 100 years, I would be dead. I would have no value to offer. I don't know what it would be. I mean, like I don't know how to do a lot. And I think about like if you were to ask the least capable human on the planet to put together a bicycle, and then you asked me to race that person to put together a bicycle, I'd finish like 3 days later than that person would finish. I mean, it'd be like, it's just embarrassing. And so, so I think, but what I think I have been lucky enough to do is, I'm not afraid of taking risks or like challenges. In fact, I think it like compels me. But I'm also pretty quick to recognize what I know and what I don't know. And so I've always been able to, like, I've never had this curse of feeling threatened by people that are better than me. In fact, like it's sort of always been my ambition to have people that are better than me around me all the time. And I've always thought of my job as to sort of put the team together, make sure we're sort of organized and clear on why we're doing what we're doing together as a team. I think I've been good at that in my life. And I think the only other piece I've been good at is I spent so much time with early stage companies is sort of recognizing sort of the concentric circles of strategy as the things can unfold, like being able to connect the dots going forward around, okay, we're in this category today. This category becomes possible when these things become true. This becomes possible when these things become true. And so I always just think in those terms. And so it's enabled me to like hire great people, empower great people, and then over time you build, I like to believe, a good positive reputation with folks. And I've been humbled at having a lot of really talented and smart people that I would happily go work for, who have been happy to come and work with me multiple times in my career. And so that part's been really great and something something I'm really proud of. But I think I just sort of fell in love with running teams. When I playing sports as a kid, I was the oldest of 5. I played sports as a kid. I always sort of ended up in, being captain of a team or leading our groups or whatever it was. I just have always enjoyed the sort of idea of bringing people together and helping them to do their best work. So I don't know, been lucky, I guess, in life that way. But I started out studying founders and builders and watching them navigate sort of challenges in building companies, trying to bring new ideas to market, creating new spaces. And so I just sort of got a crash course in that early in my career. And then when I went through, I did end up going to college. When I went through college, I continued to work with that group, and I got to do more interesting things over time. I got into business development, and then eventually I got deployed to go run parts of or entire companies as part of that. And they were small businesses, in every sense of the word, but um, the learning and growth just compounds as you kind of go through that, especially when you get to work in lots of different industries. I think it helps you to really connect the dots. What are the common threads, by stage, by challenge, and then what are the sort of nuances that you have to imagine. So I say folks a lot, there's some kind of an operating system that sits behind it all that powers 70% of the playbook, right? And then there's some sort of application layer that you have to adjust or adapt based on the industry that you're in, the market you're serving, all the complexity that comes with, being in different unique spaces. So that's sort of been the way that I work. But the common threads and common ingredients are certainly like build great teams, get really clear about why and how you work together, and continue to sort of make improvements every day as a team, as a company. Those are obvious, but common threads.
And if you could fly back to Scott Gifis at, let's say, 27, and you know what you know now, you know what's coming in the future, what advice would you give to him? What career advice?
So many pieces of advice. Like skip tequila, probably not the move.
Always?
No,
Come
actually,
on.
it's a lie. It's a bold-faced lie because I love tequila. But no, I think honestly, the advice I'd have is like what you hear a lot of folks say. I worried a lot at 27 about everything. I mean, I think I still do. You sort of have this natural built-in skepticism, like a healthy kind of pessimism that helps you really think through the downside, because it's easy to count the upside, right? But you have to really think through how do you mitigate risk as you go. And so, but I would worry so much about a lot. And I think, and I was so, I mean, I still am ambitious, but I was so ambitious back then. I think I probably, it's still a thing today, but I did not stop and celebrate almost ever. It was as soon as you hit the goal, you were on to the next goal. Frankly, oftentimes before you even achieved the goal, you were raising the bar for the next set of things you could go and do. And I think that is really like a great, it motivates you, it drives you, it's helpful, but I think you don't realize how damaging it is to yourself and to everybody around you. Your team, the people that care about you, that want you to be, you gotta really make sure that you're recognizing the progress you're making. You're looking back and really taking stock of the growth that you're having, the lessons you've learned, even in failure, specifically in failure. And and just enjoying more of life along the way. I think making time to really like appreciate the things is I think it's just like a common life lesson, but that's certainly the biggest thing. I mean, pitfalls to avoid. I honestly, I even in the places where I made really grave errors in how I navigated certain situations. Like I remember when I first went to Criteo, it was my first time being in a company where it had a real political element to it, and politics always has this sort of negative connotation. And I certainly felt that at the time, but really it's just a function of building stakeholders and navigating all those things, and collaborating well with folks and getting aligned with folks. And so we, prior to that, I had a big job at a company called Career Builder, but we were set up in these sort of remote areas, so it really never became an issue for me. I could just build what I needed, lead the teams that I needed to lead. I had a lot of great experiences there. That was my first time realizing, you have to start to build these relationships. And it was the first time I was brought into a company as an executive versus being brought in, at an earlier stage and building my way up, so to speak. And I did not do it well. I think I stepped on a lot of toes and screwed up a lot during that process. We had a lot of success. I think the team's done great. We had a great exit, et cetera. But I learned a lot of hard lessons, the hard way. And I could go back and give myself advice, but I probably wouldn't have listened to it anyway. And so, I think you have to go through some of those experiences. I beat myself up on it for a long time, but I learned a ton, and I think, grew a ton in the process. And try to get better and better, in terms of how you think about that stuff. Um, like I said, it wasn't a toxic environment. It was just there was a lot of different players involved, and you had to think through how to navigate that stuff. And it's just not experience that I had prior to that.
I think that's good advice. And yeah, it's tough to give our former selves advice because all of those mistakes we made, ideally you learn from them, right? And so you almost don't want to rob yourself of the mistakes because that's where all the growth happens. But I feel you deeply on the not acknowledging goals and progress. I think that's something I was talking to our Paul, our platform and newest partner at the fund of, just constantly go, raise the bar, do more things. And yeah, we could be a lot better at, just pausing and be like, oh wow, that was super
I mean,
cool.
yeah, like what the team has done at GTM Fund is incredible. And even I mean, I seeing a lot of the inside stuff there. I mean, where you're I know the ambitions are big and the opportunity is massive. And so you all will go after that. But I think appreciating and recognizing how far you've come in a very short period of time and really taking stock and celebrating that it's special. I mean, I've been part of a lot of funds. The community that you all built and the way in which we are able to really add what I believe is add real value to the fund, and the portfolio is special. You guys should appreciate how special that is for sure.
Thank you, man. I appreciate you saying that and appreciate you being a big part of it. I think the wake up call for me of that realization is as our team is like growing, right? We have, 5 of us now in this office. We got Max, we've got another one remote. And if you don't do those things because you're hardwired a certain way, and I've always been hardwired that way, it's like, okay, as soon as I'm close to the goal, I just consider it done and I'm on to the next goal. That will bleed into the team. And I know that's an unhealthy behavior. I know that doesn't make me happy, but it's just how it does. And so that's, I think, where it has come to my attention of like, I don't want to have that be a culture, and I imagine that's what shifted some of your thinking because it must have been crazy. I see this on this little micro scale, and I've built teams before and past roles, and now we're building here again, but certainly not at the scale that you have. And it must be kind of freaky when you're running, teams of 100, how much people are a reflection of you and the actions you're doing. Like even so much of like, you're not eating lunch. Like Scott always eats lunch at your desk. Then you look around, you're like, oh shit, 50% of the office now eats their lunch at their desk. And like these little things that you don't think anyone's watching, like they're watching. How is that at scale? And when did you sort of notice that? It must have been freaky.
There's been a couple times. There's been a couple like points of realization where I was like, what is going on here? And I was like, that's what's going on here. So I remember the first time it happened, I'm sitting, I was a VP at the time, and I it was a bigger company, and somebody came in and they were presenting, on their business unit to me, as kind of like at the time we did these like quarterly planning and review and planning processes, pretty standard. And anyway, presenting, and I'm realizing they're so nervous. I'm like, why are they so nervous? Like, what are they doing? What are they? And I'm looking at myself and looking at others. I'm like, yeah, I'm like, shit, they're nervous because of me. And I wanted to like stop the meeting and be like, look, here's the deal. If you knew what a dumpster fire of a human I have been for so long in my life, like you would not for a second like nervous. In fact, if anything, you would just come in and be like, you check in with me. Are you okay right now? Like that, I mean, like you would never be anxious about it. So it was like my first, like, I got to start being careful. And then, exactly as you described. In fact, I think Stella said it the best one time. He was explaining a story when he was at Twitter, running Twitter, and several times ago, obviously. And I remember the story he told, and it was about the power of your influence and how to like really appreciate, because everybody's always watching and listening, right? Not only for the things that you do or you say, but the things you don't do or you don't say, and that has so many layers and ripples to it, and it can be exhausting. And you have to just really, you really have to show up and be very intentional when you're at work, right? Because everybody's sort of plugged into you. You are the source of energy in a lot of those cases. And so, it goes back to like, you've got to be really disciplined about how you make sure you have your own energy and your own sources of energy. But anyway, so Dick made a comment where he was in the office, and he was getting coffee or something like that. And it was sort of later in the day, and he made a comment about, man, there's all these flies in the office. And then he said, oh, it must be these plants. They must be, the flies must be like brought in with the plants. That's it. Just making conversation. Next day he comes in, there's not a single plant in the entire office at Twitter. Somebody like shot a note to somebody like, Dick hates the plant, like get it all out of here, and the whole thing. And it was like my favorite story. Because obviously, he's a more scale there, but it's such a true thing, and you really have to be so careful. And again, I use the word intentional about what you're trying to communicate, what you're trying to say, and oftentimes trying to explain it. You're never going to make everybody happy. You're never going to be, that. But I think you just recognize that. But exactly to that point, the reason why you really want to make sure you're taking breaks, stopping, and even things like, when you send emails out to your team and when you send Slacks, and helping people to understand kind of your own operating manual, your own operating process, because I don't sleep a lot. Like, that's, a lot of folks know that about me. I 2-3 hours of sleep a night is kind of my thing, and you're like, oh my God, that's so terrible. It's like, this is how I've always been built, and I'm not lying awake, miserable, or like my brain's not racing. I just don't sleep a ton, and so I work, when my brain works, and so I'll get up and I'll clear out a bunch of emails. Well, I started to delay the emails and the Slacks and such so that people weren't getting them. Because if I send you an email on a Saturday, I don't expect you to get back to me on Saturday. Get back to me on Monday, or when, I'll let you know if it's urgent, but that's not how people operated. And so I found myself at one point with everybody, always responding on all these different tools. There was this expected kind of like response time that I never intended. So those types of things, you really have to be thoughtful about. I think on the same vein, there's certain things that you have to know that you're modeling activity, and you can leverage it to your advantage. So I take reviews even with my C-suite very seriously, and I make sure that I gather feedback from folks that are around them, different stakeholders. I make sure that they're getting, I try to be as real time as possible, but also thoughtful and in sort of more formal reviews and such. And I do it because I care, and I'm very much about, growth mindset and making sure we're always growing, learning, getting a little bit better every day. But I also do it to make damn sure that behavior is being modeled, right? And that it's being done consistently for everybody, because those are the things that really matter. Providing feedback, coaching, development, real candid, like a clear mirror to people so that they can grow. Those things are really critical for companies to have trust, to have growth. And so, it works to your advantage too, but you have to be smart and thoughtful about how you do it.
Couldn't agree more. I mean, that last point is key, and can be so easy to slip up if you're like, I don't know, in lockstep with your CRO or your COO, and you're talking literally daily. Sometimes it can feel like almost like a performance to do this like performance review. Like, I know what's going on. We talk every second, but it's important to be super diligent, because it's not just about, checking in with where they're at, but it's modeling the performance that they're going to then push down to their reports, that they're going to push down to theirs, and so on and so forth. That's big. And if we had more time, I would definitely grill you on this 2-3 hours sleep. I remember you telling me that before. That's just insane. Yeah, that's like always just been a thing.
Yeah, maybe it's 3, 4, something like that. But yeah, I mean, there's never been a lot of sleep in my life. Yeah, ever since I was like a baby. I mean, it's just like, and at this point, it's probably not going to change. Like, I don't think I'll die younger, maybe. But it's just kind of how I'm built. So
People are built different, but we should get you in a lab. We should get you in a lab, figure out what's going on. Maybe we bottle that up.
There are people that don't need as much sleep, because I've done some studies on this. And then like every so often I'll crash. But what's funny is like I'll sleep for like, if I sleep for a long time, it's like 6 hours, 7 maybe. But I'm always tired when I do. I'm like more tired when I catch up on sleep. I don't know.
Conversation for another day. I'm a very terrible sleeper as well.
Or maybe you're just really efficient.
We're efficient sleepers. That's what it is. An optimized sleeper. I want to pull us back to this theme of team building, and that term, that idea. It's kind of like it's vague, right? Like, what does that mean? But I would love to attack it through sort of a lens of, early stage teams. You advise for a bunch, you invest in a bunch, you built a bunch, and really, when you break it down, all businesses are just a collection of humans all working together towards the same goal. And ideally that goal spits off some capital, it's really like all it is. And so the team, if that is true, is like, it's the most important thing. How have you approached team building in the past? And we'll talk through what you think works, and then on the flip side, what you would sort of advise against.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot to it, and there's layers and levels, but I would say, I think two things, observations. One, a lot of times, companies grow at rates, successful companies, especially, if you're in the upper quartile or decile, you're growing at rates that are, it's just, it's unfair to expect humans are going to grow at the same rate, right? There's just things that evolve. You're brand new, you got a handful of folks, then you're, suddenly you're a 10-person company, now you're a 25-person business. You still basically, even in a virtual room, people can get on the room, you can see the tiles on your screen, like everybody can kind of know everybody. And then you reach these inflection points as you scale. We go from 25 to 50 and 50 to 100. And what people don't realize is like that road from 1 to 10, you're not becoming a different company. You're becoming dozens of different companies during that time. And it happens in like rapid succession. And certain teams inevitably balloon faster than others for need. Companies also inherently, and it's just, again, the function and nature of where you are in your journey, you're building for certain things. So you start out, you primarily are hiring, go to market to acquire customers, whether that's you've got a product led motion or you've got a marketing led motion, sales, whatever the sort of channel. Like, you're building to acquire. It's only later that you start to think about, oh shit, I've got to retain and grow and navigate and expand. And so, like, more times than not, CS comes later instead of earlier. And so that's your go-to-market function. You don't, when you're hiring a marketer, you're starting out often with a demand generation, especially, a growth or dem gen sort of focused marketer. As you scale, you need more of that sort of product marketing experience to really connect the dots, get your positioning, your messaging right, your strategy down. You get really, maybe it's brand. It depends on the business. But my point is, like, these different disciplines become required. People's the same side, right? If you're smart enough to hire in the people organization early, which I always recommend, you solve a lot of your problems. But oftentimes you'll hire somebody that comes up in recruiting because you're trying to acquire talent, right? And you're trying to bring people in the fold. So you're a recruiter, and then you have an HR leader that's really a recruiter. And it's not to say that you can't make that leap, but that's hard. That's a tough leap to make. Your head of finance is often, either a bookkeeper or, they're a good modeling person, but they don't understand how to scale a financial operation. You end up in these pockets where you end up with talent that might be appropriate for right now, but a year later, 2 years later, they might be wildly out of their depth. And some folks can adapt and grow, yada yada. And so how do companies combat that? Well, they go and they hire really senior folks from big companies that get romantic about joining a startup. That's a whole, we can go deep on that one about why people from big companies often fail to transition into smaller, earlier stage companies. And it's like an epidemic. Or you end up trying to layer people who have glorified titles underneath other people, right? So, we talked about this a little bit, but, I talk to a bunch of companies, CEOs, founders that are looking to hire a COO, and I'm constantly like, you do not want a COO because you're solving the wrong problem. But we can come back to that in a sec. But so when I think about the scale, I think what's important when you're team building is to make sure you understand what are you really solving for in hiring? Because I think we have this default to like throw bodies at problems. I think it's becoming a little bit less as capital is a little bit more constrained, people being thoughtful around it, but it's still sort of a real thing. And so as a founder, I always say, folks, if whatever you're spending the most of your time on as a founder, whatever's like sopping up a lot of your energy and time, you need to then really think about, do I need to hire into that area of the business? And that's when you're brand new, that's how you think about things. And I think folks are so quick to be like, oh, we need to put up this org chart and all these, teams and functions, and we need this role and this role and this role. I'm like, well, why do you need that role? And more often than not, it's because they're future proofing, or they're trying to like get ahead of it, or that's just what somebody told them they should do. And I was like, I think this conventional functionality about how you structure teams and business is just broken. It doesn't have to be the way that you build things, especially early stage. You need a lot of collaboration. Everybody's kind of involved in everything. There's only so many priorities you can navigate as a company. You hire all these senior level leaders for all the different areas. They're going to have agendas for their departments that may or may not matter right now for what matters to the company. So when you're hiring, I have a template that I use, and I basically make everybody use it. And I say, first you have to propose why you're hiring for the role, even if it's an existing role that we've got inside the business, and you can make that distinction. And then secondly, you go, okay, what is this person going to do for the next 6 to 18 months? Because anything beyond that, you're lying to yourself and everybody else involved that you have any idea what this person's going to do. Frankly, beyond like 12 months, you're guessing. But what I would say is, if you're talking about the next 6 months or 12 months, be explicit. Be really clear cut about what it is they're building, why that matters, what's got to get done. How do you think about that? Like, really be thoughtful of what you're hiring for. Then you want to think about, okay, what are the skills and attributes that this person needs to have that they bring to the table? And I say skills and attributes intentionally. I don't talk about experiences. I think people get caught up in experience. They come from this industry. They did this type of project before. Yada yada. It's all bullshit. First of all, they didn't do it. Nobody did anything on their own. You can get really mired or get excited about somebody that comes from a space but didn't build anything there. They're just in there, and maybe through osmosis they're picking things up. But just because somebody runs BI at a huge company with a great BI infrastructure doesn't mean they know how to build a BI function inside your company, right? And so, we'll talk about profile in a second, but I think really nailing down what are the skills and the attributes that this person bring to the table that you're hiring for above all else. Because that's the other thing. And, Ben Horowitz talked about this, and the hard thing about hard things is like if you're not really clear cut about why you're hiring and who you're trying to hire for, like what are the skills, then you end up in a gnarly situation where you got 15 people with 15 different views of what a head of product marketing is supposed to bring to the table, and you haven't defined what you're looking for. And so people will say, I didn't like him because they didn't have this or they didn't have that. And so you end up hiring somebody that's kind of average at everything versus excellent in the thing that you need to be excellent in. And so, being really clear cut about that. I also will, the other thing is I'll say, well, why this over any other role? So why this role? Why is this role the priority? Why this as an incremental hire versus repurposing an existing headcount or role that matters? And then I get into, and then you can get into the job. But I think those are really important facets for being very smart about who you're hiring for and why you're hiring that person. Otherwise, you can get caught up in, trying to make a headline versus trying to build a team that's going to work really well. And then you got to revisit those folks, because if they're in the role for 18 months or 2 years, you got to go back and really assess in the same way. Okay, well, what does the VP of sales do for me now? Like, what do we need to have today? Is our person that person? And if you believe they are, but they just don't have the skill sets or experiences, you got to go and invest in supporting them to grow. And if not, you just got to continue to be honest and open with people about where things are, what your expectations are, how that's evolving or changing. And yeah, so but I think that framework helps, and it gets everybody aligned who's hiring. It gets everybody It helps the candidate to understand what success looks like. It helps you to really think through what you're hiring for, and sort of stack rank that against other priorities you have, all of it. So I just find it's a very helpful project to go through anytime you're thinking about hiring anybody.
I like it. There was a couple things there. Yeah, it's almost like sounds like there's like 3 stages you see in growth in terms of talent. You're going to have like the acquisition is kind of the first wave, people that always are thinking of like net new, acquiring customers, and then you're going to bring in more and more kind of folks that are better at like retaining, thinking more kind of long term, and then the third one, you're going to get more people that are looking for growth and growing that existing, which I think is a good kind of model to think about. This rubric, yeah.
It's not even necessarily like that's the order you should go. It's just sort of the natural evolution of teams as they scale, and you just need to constantly check and challenge whether or not the team you hired at the time that you hired them is the team that you need going forward. And we obviously want everybody to continue to grow and evolve, but it's also okay for folks to learn a ton, do a ton, be great at what they've done, but then go back to a company at a similar stage to where this company was when they started, bring all that knowledge, experience, that ability to see around corners because they've seen this play out and they've done they've learned from some of the mistakes, and they're gonna have a lot more longevity in that next opportunity, a lot more value to bring, and they'll go further. And over time, that's how people evolve. And I think it's always this like fear of having people transition out of the company. And I think that's actually something to be celebrated when that happens. Or if somebody's, we bring somebody in above them, or we say, you know what, you were managing 3 different areas, but now we've matured enough as a company where we can actually go deep on this thing that you have superpowers in. And yeah, it means your scope is getting smaller, but you're going a lot deeper. And not only have the courage to make those decisions, but celebrate them and communicate them at scale inside the company so people understand that there are lots of different ways to think about growth and evolution and celebrate milestones inside the company. There's just so much more you can do to seize that. And it's always got this like negative sort of taboo connotation around it. And I think it's the opposite.
When I look around and some of the best operators I know, one of their greatest skills is just knowing what they're good at. I can think of a number of people that I'm a 0 to 1 guy. That's all I do. Or I'm a 5 to 10 and that's it. And I'm not going to take anything else. And as soon as we hit the 10, I'm out of here, and you just refine that talent. And I think, yeah, a lot of times we, through a sense of like loyalty or something, we want to keep these people forever, but it might not even be in their best interest. Let them go, do it again, somewhere else. So yeah, I think that's a great point. I also love this idea you said of this kind of rubric for every role is why are we hiring this? What are they doing 6 to 12 months? Like be hyper specific on that. And then what are the skills and attributes that we need for them to do those tasks in the next 6 to 12 months? And I feel like a lot of companies and founders and teams, they like think of, okay, we're hiring a product marketer or we're hiring a VP of sales. What's the best makeup of a VP of sales or product marketing, and put that like this general hat on versus putting it through the lens of, hey, we need someone to do this exact job, is a powerful, subtle like reframe. So I like that a lot. All right, man. I wanted to quickly go back. So you mentioned this pitfall that a lot of folks fall into, which is looking to bring on head of operations, COO, this magic person who's going to fix all their problems. Love to hear your thoughts.
Well, it happens a lot, right? And there was a great article, and it was a town hall that Redpoint did, Tomas did, with Allison Pickens, she was the COO of Gainsight early days. She's written a ton on the COO role, and years ago there's sort of this like rise of the COO, which she's more eloquently than I have spoken to. But there's a lot of really great resources around it. But inevitably, what she talked about is there's these 4 archetypes. I'd argue there's now a 5th, but she had these 4 archetypes. One was the sort of like glorified chief of staff. One was sort of the CFO plus profile, which I think is generally understood. there was the CRO plus profile, and then there was kind of this like number 2 or CEO profile, and each of them had their own pros and cons. So the CRO would own go to market. Oftentimes they would own a couple of other adjacent areas like go to market ops or RevOps, maybe BI, maybe some sort of version of BizOps or PMO, what have you. The CFO would often own HR and legal, and again BI and some of the operational programming. And then you've got the CEO number 2, which is basically like, I'll run whatever you're not great at as the CEO, wherever you don't spike, and I'll run the day-to-day company. And that was always kind of my profile as a COO profile. I think there's a 5th now, which is not really. I think the track isn't as clear as it should be. But I think there's a CHRO plus profile. There's a growing world of CHROs who are just world-class business minds who also deeply understand how to build out the whole people function, and given all of your execution stems through through your people, or at least largely through your people. I think there's a huge opportunity. I think most COOs of the future will have grown up as chief people officers, but with a really deep appreciation for business strategy and the metrics, and having just a much more comprehensive grasp. And I've been fortunate to hire them and to have worked with really, really powerful, sort of impactful people leaders in my career. And I think it's the secret weapon for the founders that get it, to lean into that stuff really early and hire yourself, and not go the recruiter route. Although some recruiters can make that leap for sure. I know a ton that have, but that grew up in that sort of HRBP function where they're really designed to be the general manager of the team and help you think about building and organizing your team to win. So, but anyway, so I think what happens though in a lot of cases is that instead of hiring the COO, because first of all, COO is like the most nebulous, ambiguous role that exists, because every other role has like pretty clear disciplines. As I just mentioned, there's all these archetypes and ways you can spike and flow. And so what happens a lot is a COO gets to a certain size and they say, holy shit, this is the biggest company I've ever run. Right. And that might be at 10 people, it might be at 100 people, but somewhere they're like, what's happening? And the other thing that starts to happen is, we talked about before, you reach these different inflection points in the company's growth, and they realize, hey, the team I have today isn't really up to we're not operating at the level that we need. I know what we'll do. I'll hire a number 2 to come in and like fix it. I've shared this, I think, with you before, is like the analogy that I use is that Simpsons episode where they have these like dangerous birds that start getting overpopulated in Springfield, and then they go and they get these lizards that eat the birds, and then the lizards become overrun, and they're everywhere, and so then they go and get these snakes to kill the lizards, and it's just like this never-ending thing. And so really what I say to folks is like, first let's talk about what you're trying to solve for, what the problems are. And more often than not, the COO is a role that they're hiring for to compensate for a team that has not kept up with the growth rate of the company. And rather than have an honest conversation with that team and really kind of manage it directly, which again, I just think this constant state of feedback and always letting people know where they sit, what's going well, what you're concerned about, what your expectations are on the role, that should be a regular conversation with every leader, especially at the executive level, but frankly, everywhere. But instead of that, they say, I'm going to bring in somebody else to help level up the team. And you may still need that, right? And I don't mean to say that you don't need to hire a COO, but you have to be very, very intentional and very thoughtful about why you're hiring that COO, what their job is, and specifically for the COO and the like if it's a glorified CRO, just hire the CRO. Make them a CRO. If you have a CRO today that really is more of a VP of sales, then have the conversation with them about them accepting the VP role. And if they can't, because their ego can't stomach it or any number of things, or they can't handle the optics, well, then you figure out a fair and honest transition plan for them, and you take care of them and you do right by them. Because if they're doing a good job, but they're not able to make the turn, then that's okay. Going back to what we talked about before, they might be better suited to go to an earlier stage company. And they'll get to go out at a time when they've done really well. So they're going to, get to go to an early stage company and repeat what they've learned and even better, and probably give themselves time to scale. Hopefully, because I've been layered in my career and I hated it when it happened, and I can't imagine my career without it now. I've got to work for some amazing people during that time. But I think that's where you often fall down. And so I think that's like the first thing. And then if you are going to hire it, you have to be really thoughtful about, well, what is that COO going to own? And not just own, like, I have this responsibility for it, but what about decision making, authority? What's the interaction model going to be between the CEO and that team, or the set of teams in that environment? These are things that you want to talk about before you get in the role, before you take the job, not afterwards. If you're aspiring to go be a COO or number two, you really have to make sure you're forcing that. And you are better off spending 3 months figuring out it's not going to work than taking the job and spending 3 months realizing it's not going to work. And so, being really thoughtful around that, and then revisiting it regularly. Hey, we spent a quarter like this. What's working? What's not working? Right? Don't be knee-jerk reaction like change, but you have to have that steady dialogue. You have to know, for the founder, oftentimes they don't have, they probably have a co-founder, and maybe that person spikes in a different area. They did something, early on really well, but they might not be that true business partner that they wish they had, right? So that you're coming in as a COO, that the sort of president COO role is often that, like, business partner they wish they had, that partner to the CEO to really think about where we want to take this thing. And then, hey, you run the stuff here. I'm going to focus in these areas that are my superpowers that I've done really well in. And let's just make sure we continue to Batman and Robin, switching roles in the different areas where it makes sense. I think a lot of folks don't have those hard conversations, both in terms of what the COO role is and whatnot. And it just ends up getting really complicated, because you start to realize they're going to make decisions that you might not agree with as a CEO founder. And you're not going to have as much connection to all the different areas of the business because you're entrusting somebody to go and run that. I've been in plenty of places where I was the number two. I had C-levels reporting to me, and I didn't want to block them from having, regular cadence, regular interaction with the CEO. So you've got to really be thoughtful about what that model looks like and how to balance those conversations and make sure that, you're handling that well, because you can create a lot of challenges for that team if they start to feel like, I've got two parents now that I've got to convince to say yes, kind of a deal, right? So again, that who has authority, decision making, how do you create kind of like, how do you manage the communication interaction models? All that stuff really should be thought through. And I think a lot of times, like I said, it's sort of a secondary thought. And then going back to the profile, what is it explicitly you need this person to solve in the next 6 months, 12 months as a COO or any other role? And do they bring the exact skill sets for that problem? Because again, we all get starry-eyed hiring the headline maker from, the big company, Google or something like that. But more often than not, those folks struggle to make that transition into those leadership roles. And oftentimes in the times where they don't, it's a failure on both sides. One, the big company person gets romantic about less bureaucracy and, making an impact and being closer to the front lines. What they don't realize is, like, when they join the company in this new role, they're going to spend 70% of their first year teaching people what their job actually is versus what they perceived it to be. And building capability around them, not even within their function, so that they can even do their job a year from now. Meanwhile, there's a backlog of things that the company has amassed of work that they want to see done by this role, by this person, based on whatever perception they had of what the role's supposed to do versus what the person that was hired thinks it is. So you got this disconnect there. You got a laundry list of things. And within 6 months, they're not delivering, they're not knocking out any of the quick wins that they thought they would knock out because they're busy teaching people how to do their job so they can do their job. It's a mess. And so again, what is it you're hiring for? What is it you're trying to solve? What skill sets and attributes does that person bring to the table? And then when you go and hire a person out of a bigger company, if that makes sense, doesn't always, but if it does, you're at least really clear about why you've chosen that individual with that gift, those skill sets, versus anybody else. And again, I always say to folks, like, hiring somebody that's 10 years ahead of you is just not going to be useful to you. Even as an advisor, it's not helpful, really. Maybe they can think through some things, but hiring somebody that's 2 years ahead of you, 2.5, 3 years ahead of you, that's seen it from where you are to where they are now, super valuable. And then, I always tell folks, like, I hire for grit. I don't need polish. I need grit, because this gig is tough, right?
Always. That was great, man. There was a lot to unpack there, and I agree. It's always grit. We just made our newest hire, a new VP of marketing, and she beat out hundreds of candidates from pure grit. And that's, I already know it was one of the better hires I've made in my career. Optimizing for that grit is huge. And yeah, I will go so far. And I was trying to think as you were saying it, if this is true, like the whole getting someone from a big enterprise company to come work at your startup. I don't think I've actually ever personally seen it work. Like, just from companies I've actually been a part of, I don't think I've ever seen it work. Which is a bold claim, and I'm sure it has. I'm sure there's some listeners out there
No,
that have.
look, there's a but it becomes two things, really. It's a DNA thing, right? That, again, that you're a large organization. You don't even realize how much time you have to spend in sort of the politic arena, right? Of sort of building stakeholders, communication, making people aware, all those, and those are phenomenal skill sets to have, right? You've got great presence, great knowledge. You're a deep thinker. You can see the future. Like, it's just like all these wonderful things. But then the ball gets served over to you, and you've got to volley that thing back. And it's like, no, you got to actually fucking do it. Like, there's nobody to ask to do it. And if you're like, well, where do I get the data for this? And like, just laugh. Like, what fucking data are you talking about? Like, there's,
I'll build a process around this first. So give me 6 months. I'll build the process.
Yeah. Who's our BI team? You're the BI person. First person to speak is the BI person. Like, it's just these things that people don't grasp. And even for me, I struggle with it. I'm definitely much better at I have a lot more leverage when I have arms and legs around me. People that I can delegate to and work with. But there's just endless amounts of shit that have to get done, and the only way it's going to happen is if you do it. And I think a lot of folks struggle with making that transition. It sounds romantic until you're working on 4 projects at once and you literally don't have bandwidth to do anything. And you're in meetings all day and all that jazz, which is a whole nother thing that I hate. But so yeah, I mean, look, people can make the transition, but it's really hard, and they often don't deeply understand it. Like, I every candidate I've ever talked to that comes from, and I've had successful folks, working with me in the past, and they brought something specific that we were hiring for that we wanted and needed, but they always have shell shock when they join, because again, people don't know what they do. They have to teach people don't have what they need to support them, so they have to go and do that. People always make fun of me. I do this analogy about a nuclear submarine that I got to visit a long time ago as part of my leadership development. And I remember being on the bridge, and everybody, all the lieutenants had their monitors, and they're kind of thinking about like their key metrics they monitor as it related to operating the boat. But we were in the engine room, and subs don't have like extra room. There's not like a room, like a bonus room that they're thinking about. It's a war machine, right? And so everything has a very specific purpose. But what was fascinating about the person that ran the engine room was she was rattling off. Not only did she understand obviously what her engine room needed to do, she understood what every single room on the boat needed in certain critical situations from her, and what she should expect from them. Like, it's just the working knowledge of all the different teams and what they had to do in certain situations, which are, keep in mind, it really is life and death for them in a lot of cases. So the motivation is certainly pretty high, but it was fascinating. And it was this big eye opener for me around how many problems exist inside companies because people are either not well educated into what the other side is doing and why, and what they need from you and why, or there's a communication breakdown in terms of how information is relayed back and forth in language that both sides could understand, right? It's like, but anyway, I forget why we got into that tangent, but yep, it's all real. But so, like why those early stage folks don't really take, and I much prefer hiring candidates that have had to build their career brick by brick, that have had to navigate a lot of adversity. Like I don't sales folks. Nothing against my a lot of friends at Google and other places, but they don't ever have a problem with somebody answering the phone when they call, right? In a meeting. The folks that have had to sell in competitive markets with maybe they weren't selling the number one product in the market at the time. Those are the challengers. Like those are the folks that'll figure it out, right? Because they've seen it, and you give them a great product, a great opportunity, and they're going to take off. So, I think of being really thoughtful about those skill sets and why you hire them is important.
Absolutely, man. Well, thank you for spending the time. That was awesome. I could probably just continue riffing with you and take the rest of your day, but I know you're a super busy guy. But man, I'm really happy we got this done. Tons of value in there. Congrats again on such an incredible run. Is this your last run, you think, at NoFraud? How many of these you got in you, man? You're an animal.
I don't know the answer to that question. I
feel like I do know the answer to that.
Yeah, probably another one. Look, we'll see. NoFraud, like, don't hang on to the name too long. We're gonna change it here because what the company is and is where we're going is changing every day. But I think there's something really special about this sort of the window where you're taking comes from 10 to 100 to a couple hundred million. It's just it attracts a certain type of people to the business, right? Which is really special, right? These are hungry, ambitious, gritty people that, again, I feel so lucky to have had an opportunity to work again and again with a lot of really talented folks who've been silly enough to want to work with me more than once, which probably some psych eval stuff that needs to happen there. But you get to have such an impact on the business. Being a disruptor is fun, but more than that, like there's so much growth that can happen in your career, no matter what level you're at in a business, when you're in a company of this size and scale. And I just love that part. I love putting the teams together. I love the sort of hair on fire run. And I tried to be unemployed after we sold Frame, and that lasted like 2 weeks. I optimized our cable bill. I was negotiating with like the person that cuts our grass. I was like trying to figure out the best optimized schedule for our kids' activities. And my wife was like, "Get the fuck out of here. Like, this is not your stuff." All right, I'll go. So I think I'm just hardwired and don't know that I'll ever really fully stop.
Yeah, you got the sickness. I call it the sickness. It's the good kind of sickness, most of the time. Sometimes not so much, but awesome, man. Well, Scott, always good chopping it up. Thanks for spending the time. Truly, I hope to see you very soon in person. And for all those listeners that hung out with us, thank you for lending us your eardrums. Listening is one thing. Think through some of the things we talked to. Apply it to your specific business and go out there and execute. And we'll see you all next week.
Thanks a lot, Scott. Do well, man.